Do nothing after this, and observe how everything falls into place. Silence is a source of great strength. Lao Tzu. In a world that constantly pushes us to react, fix, and control, Carl Jung offers a powerful alternative to observe without interfering. What if the universe doesn't need your force, but your presence? In today's video on spiritual wisdom, we explore how non-interference, deep inner stillness, and quiet witnessing can create the most profound transformations in your life. Have you ever experienced a moment where doing nothing brought the biggest shift? Comment below with your story, and let's awaken together through the power of surrender. 1. Doing more isn't the answer. Surrender is. Most men are taught that if something in their life isn't working, they need to push harder, more action, more goals, more discipline. But Carl Jung offered a quiet truth that disrupts this belief. Real transformation doesn't begin with more effort. It begins with surrender. The soul does not respond to pressure. It awakens in presence. When you constantly chase change through doing, you may be avoiding the very stillness where true clarity lives. Jung's timeless teaching, "What you resist persists," reveals that our efforts to control, fix, and force often amplify the very things we wish to escape. The pain doesn't leave, it just gets buried deeper. The chaos doesn't disappear, it waits for your silence to speak louder. Striving, in many cases, is a subtle form of resistance. It says, I don't accept what is, and I must force something better. But what if that very posture blocks the soul's natural intelligence from guiding your path? The unconscious, as Jung taught, is not moved by force. It's moved by attention. It responds to inner stillness, not outer struggle. This is where the masculine urge to do meets the deeper wisdom of being. It's not about abandoning responsibility. It's about aligning with the current instead of swimming upstream. Most of us are so used to intervening, planning, and fixing that we miss what the universe is already trying to unfold through our lives. The soul speaks in symbols, dreams, patterns, none of which can be heard when we're drowning in noise. And often, it's in our most powerless moments, when nothing seems to work, that the invitation to surrender arises. We try the affirmations, the journaling, the visualizations, and still nothing. That's when the soul whispers, stop doing and start listening. Not with your ears, but with your being. Because surrender is not the same as giving up. It's the opposite. It's choosing to trust something beyond your ego's plan, beyond your mind's timeline. When you surrender, you let the universe rearrange your life in ways your logic never could. Think of nature. The tree does not force the fruit to ripen. The ocean doesn't control the tide, yet everything unfolds in perfect rhythm. Your soul is wired to the same rhythm, but interference disrupts it. When you try to manipulate the outcome, when you obsess over timing, you're sending a message that says, I don't trust the deeper intelligence guiding my life. Jung believed in honoring the unconscious because it's not random, it's sacred. And when you surrender, you begin to see its patterns, the synchronicities, the pauses. Even the losses start to make sense, not as punishments, but as course corrections. Men who have spent their lives in control often fear surrender because it feels like weakness. But Jung's truth is that surrender is the strength of the soul. It's the moment you step back from interference and allow your inner world to reorganize itself. And in that space, the universe finally responds. Not to your demands, but to your readiness. Your willingness to get out of the way. That's when the breakthrough comes, not when you force it, but when you stop chasing it. In that sacred stillness, everything begins to shift, not because you did more, but because you finally allowed the truth to rise. Have you ever tried surrendering instead of striving? If you've experienced a moment where letting go brought unexpected clarity or transformation, share it in the comments so others can be inspired. If you've never tried it, comment, "I choose surrender," and let's begin this powerful shift together. 2. The unconscious rules until made conscious. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate." And this silent truth is playing out in the lives of so many people who don't even realize it. You think you're making decisions from free will? But what if most of your choices are being made by invisible scripts written decades ago? Scripts that tell you you're not worthy of love, that success is dangerous, or that peace is something other people get to feel, not you. You keep doing the inner work affirmations, visualizations, setting goals, but nothing sticks because the foundation is cracked. The real problem isn't what you're doing. It's what you believe deep down without even knowing it. Your outer world keeps mirroring your inner state. And if that inner state is quietly screaming, "I'm not enough," then no matter how hard you try, chaos keeps finding its way back into your life. There was a man named Jake who lived his entire adult life thinking he just had bad luck. Every time he started a new job, he felt hopeful for a while. But somehow, the same pattern always emerged. He would feel unseen, overworked, and eventually disrespected. After a few months, he'd either quit or be pushed out. It didn't make sense. He was competent, reliable, and genuinely wanted to do well. But underneath all that effort was an unconscious belief that had been planted in childhood, that work equals suffering. He had watched his father come home exhausted every day, bitter and emotionally shut down. Somewhere along the way, Jake absorbed the idea that professional success must come at the cost of freedom and joy. He never questioned that belief. He didn't even know it was there. But once he discovered this hidden narrative and made it conscious, everything changed. His energy shifted, his sense of self-worth expanded, and within 6 months, he found himself in a leadership role that respected his boundaries and honored his value. This is the silent power of the unconscious. It's not just a psychological idea. It's the invisible architecture of your life. You keep attracting the same situations, the same emotions, and the same outcomes, not because the universe is cruel, but because your internal programming keeps sending the same signal. And the universe, in its neutrality, simply responds. That's why you can't fake wholeness. You can say all the right things, act confident, play the part, but if your inner world is filled with guilt, shame, or hidden self-loathing, it will all eventually leak through. Carl Jung understood this. He taught that true transformation doesn't come from pretending to be someone new. It comes from bringing light to the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. The parts that hurt, the parts that fear, the parts that learn to survive by staying small. If you're tired of repeating the same story, stop trying to change the story's ending and start looking at who's writing the script. Are you living from awareness or autopilot? Are you listening to your soul or reacting from old wounds? Pay attention to what triggers you, what you avoid, where you sabotage, because every one of those moments is a portal to a chance to become more conscious. And consciousness is power. When you finally meet the beliefs that have been running your life in the background, you no longer call them fate. You call them what they are: lessons, invitations, healing points. The soul's language is subtle but persistent, and until you decode it, you'll keep wondering why your reality doesn't match your effort. This is your reminder that the universe isn't responding to what you say you want. It's responding to who you are beneath the surface. And when you change that signal, everything else follows. 3. Stillness is sacred, not stagnation. Stillness is not the absence of life. It is where the real life begins. Carl Jung's creative void is not emptiness, but sacred ground. It's the mysterious in-between where your old self quietly dies and the new one hasn't yet arrived. It feels unsettling because the world around you worships movement, action, and progress. But the soul has a different rhythm. In this space of silence, though nothing seems to be happening on the surface, a quiet transformation is underway. Your nervous system softens its grip, your subconscious reorganizes, and your soul begins to rewire itself from survival to truth. Most people cannot tolerate this discomfort. They run, chase distractions, force decisions, and mistake stillness for weakness. But the men who are willing to stay, to feel the tension without solving it, are the ones who discover their power is not in doing, but in being. This void is not stagnation. It is spiritual recalibration. It is where the ego loses control and the soul takes the wheel. But make no mistake, this surrender requires strength. Society teaches you to act, fix, and push forward. But Jung reminds us that what you resist persists. Trying to rush this process only delays your growth and locks you into repeating the same emotional cycles dressed in different forms. It's like digging up the roots of a tree to check if it's growing. You kill it before it even has the chance. In the same way, interrupting your own stillness out of fear will only rob you of the very transformation you're seeking. The soul doesn't shout, it whispers. And in this silence, you begin to hear it again. Watch how the universe responds when you stop interfering. Life is not punishing you, it's inviting you to trust. As muddy water settles on its own, so will your path. You don't need to fill the space with noise, plans, or control. You need to feel safe doing nothing. Because in doing nothing, you are allowing the deeper intelligence of your soul to lead. It's here where synchronicities emerge, guidance appears in subtle forms, and you start noticing divine timing in ways you never could when you were busy forcing outcomes. This is not about passivity, it's about radical presence. Stillness doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're listening. It means you've reached a point in your evolution where being aligns more than doing, and trust becomes your compass. You are not behind. You are exactly where your soul needs you to be. Stay in the stillness. Let it undo what no longer belongs, and create space for what truly does. The universe is already moving on your behalf. You just need to be still enough to see it. If this message of sacred stillness resonates with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your experience in the comments below. Have you ever felt that quiet in-between space, the pause before transformation? Let's reflect together and honor the power of becoming. 4. You're not being punished. You're being reflected. You're not being punished. You're being reflected. If things aren't moving, if doors seem closed, if your efforts feel unnoticed, it's not because the universe is turning away from you. It's because it's mirroring what you believe deep down. The spiritual truth is simple. The universe doesn't respond to your words. It responds to your frequency. You can repeat affirmations every day, but if they're coming from a place of fear, lack, or desperation, then that energy will cancel out the words. The energy behind your actions matters more than the actions themselves. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That unconscious is what gets broadcast into the universe louder than anything you say out loud. So if you're wondering why nothing's shifting, don't just look at what you're doing. Look at who you're being while doing it. The man who says, "I am successful," but secretly believes he's not good enough, is sending out confusion into the universe. The woman who visualizes love, but secretly fears abandonment, is asking the universe for something while simultaneously rejecting it through her energy. This is why people who seem to be doing less sometimes receive more. They're not forcing. They're not begging. They've learned to embody what they desire. They've aligned their spiritual identity with their external goals. They trust not because they have proof, but because they know alignment creates evidence, not the other way around. They don't manifest by chasing. They attract by becoming. And this becomes when you surrender control and allow the soul to guide the way. There's a spiritual principle that most people overlook. What you resist persists. The more you push, force, or obsess over an outcome, the more you tell the universe that you don't believe it's already yours. That vibration of lack gets echoed back. The universe is like a perfect emotional mirror. It doesn't punish you. It simply amplifies what you already believe. And belief isn't in the words, it's in the energy. So if you're operating from a place of control, fear, or unworthiness, then even your best efforts will feel heavy and unproductive. But when you step into the energy of peace, worthiness, and presence, things begin to move. You don't even need to chase. They start finding you. In everyday life, this shows up in the person who keeps changing careers, thinking the next job will fix their unhappiness, or in the person who keeps jumping from relationship to relationship, searching for love outside of themselves. But the truth is, the outer world doesn't shift until the inner world does. The discomfort, the waiting, the stillness, it's all sacred. It's the soul's invitation to stop interfering, to stop micromanaging destiny, and instead to surrender into alignment. What feels like a delay is often divine timing, preparing you for what you've asked for. And what looks like nothing happening is often everything rearranging behind the scenes. You don't attract what you want. You attract what you are. So the spiritual path isn't about doing more. It's about becoming still enough to hear your true frequency. Not the noise of anxiety, but the hum of your soul. Don't interfere, just watch. When your energy softens into trust, when your actions are born from inner knowing rather than panic, the universe responds differently. It reflects not your effort, but your essence. And when that essence is whole, calm, and grounded, reality bends to meet it. If this message resonated with you, comment "reflected" below to affirm your awareness. And if you're ready to shift your energy from fear to alignment, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Let's grow in spiritual wisdom together. 5. Doing nothing is radical trust. Doing nothing isn't laziness, it's radical spiritual trust. It's the soul's quiet rebellion in a world that worships constant effort. As Carl Jung understood deeply, real change doesn't come from forcing things into place, but from allowing the unconscious to guide the transformation. You don't need to beg the universe. You need to become the kind of person who no longer begs. Stillness isn't about giving up. It's a fierce, grounded statement. I am no longer chasing. I am aligning. When you stop interfering and start observing, you shift from desperate energy into magnetic calm. That shift is everything. You're not stepping away from action because you're confused. You're stepping back because you're finally clear. You trust that your intentions, once set, ripple out into the universe and attract exactly what's meant for you without the need for control or panic. There's a woman I know who tried tirelessly to manifest a new job. She'd send applications, perform every ritual she read about, visualize, pray, and affirm, but nothing worked. Until one day, she simply stopped, not out of defeat, but surrender. She applied for one last role, closed her laptop, and turned inward. She replaced anxious effort with journaling, meditating, walking in silence. That space created by her surrender became a portal. Within days, she received the call. She got the job. Not just any job, the one that fit her soul like a missing puzzle piece. That is what happens when you let go. When you stop controlling the how and when, the universe finally has room to move. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." So when you grasp, you amplify chaos. But when you release, you welcome clarity. This is not mystical fluff. It's spiritual law, grounded in Jung's understanding of the psyche and the soul. The unconscious knows things before you do. It holds patterns, desires, and truths that your surface mind cannot yet grasp. So when life feels stuck, it may be because your soul is calling you into silence, into listening, into waiting. Stillness becomes the sacred space where your inner self meets divine timing. And the truth is, if you're always doing, always striving, always pushing, you leave no room for the divine to respond. That's why the art of doing nothing, when done with presence, is a practice of deep intelligence. It's not laziness, it's spiritual maturity. And it's in this space of conscious surrender that the most unexpected miracles take root. So here's the lesson. If nothing's moving, maybe you're not meant to push harder. Maybe you're being asked to become still enough to hear what your soul already knows. Surrender is not weakness. It is alignment with a power that is far greater than your mind's limited plans. Let go of the pressure to constantly act. Let go of the illusion that urgency equals progress. Your becoming is already in motion. Trust the pause. Trust the timing. Trust the unseen. This is the spiritual wisdom Carl Jung left behind, not to force your life into shape, but to trust that when you stop interfering, the universe responds in ways you couldn't possibly orchestrate. 6. Return to wholeness, not perfection. Carl Jung's concept of individuation is not about striving to become perfect, but about returning to a state of inner wholeness, a spiritual homecoming to the self that existed before the world demanded you to be something else. You were never meant to chase flawlessness like a prize at the end of a race. Wholeness isn't found in self-improvement routines or perfectionist ideals. It's found when you stop trying to fix yourself and start remembering yourself. Beneath every fear, trauma, or limiting belief is the original soul, the version of you that has always been enough. The process of healing isn't about adding layers of achievement or control. It's about peeling away what's false, what was never yours, and allowing your authentic self to rise again. Jung famously said, "I'd rather be whole than good," reminding us that spiritual growth doesn't demand perfection. It demands honesty, presence, and courage. When you interfere, when you obsess over the outcomes, force the timing, and micromanage the process, you block the very current that's trying to carry you home. The universe doesn't respond to effort the way the world does. It responds to alignment, and alignment begins with trust. True trust isn't passive, it's powerful. It's a deep knowing that the more you listen instead of control, feel instead of suppress, and watch instead of chase, the more life begins to unfold in your favor. The signs show up, the doors open, the synchronicities increase. This is the silent spiritual language of the universe, and it only becomes clear when you're still enough to hear it. You cannot force your way into wholeness. It must be allowed. As Jung said, what you resist persists. The more you try to perfect what doesn't need fixing, the more you drift from your truth. To live in this deeper awareness is to reclaim your energy from all the places it's been scattered, trying to be accepted, trying to be good enough, trying to fit into someone else's idea of success. But your soul was never here to conform. It came here to remember. And in that remembrance, you begin to realize that the shadow parts of you aren't shameful, they're sacred. The wounds aren't barriers, they're bridges. The discomfort isn't punishment, it's a signal that you're shedding what no longer aligns. Wholeness is not a destination you arrive at. It's a recognition of what was always there before the noise began. When you truly see this, when you surrender the need to interfere, when you let the unfolding be enough, the universe meets you in ways that defy logic. Because the soul doesn't speak in logic, it speaks in resonance. And when your being is in resonance with your truth, that's when everything begins to move. Not because you pushed, but because you aligned. Leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any soul-nourishing insights like this. Type in the comments, "I choose to return to wholeness," and let the journey back to your true self begin. 7. You already are what you seek. You already are what you seek. This truth, so often buried beneath years of striving, shame, and social conditioning, is not something you need to earn or chase. It is something to remember. This journey is not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to the man you were before the world told you to be someone else. Before they told you that your silence meant weakness, that your stillness meant laziness, that your soul wasn't enough without proof of success. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." And it's in that awakening that your transformation begins, not through force or control, but through surrender. Because the moment you stop interfering, the universe begins to move on your behalf in ways your logic cannot comprehend. Letting go isn't giving up. It's an act of deep trust. a spiritual intelligence that understands there's a greater design than what your ego can grasp. You've been taught to grind, to chase, to conquer. But real strength, the kind that changes your life from the inside out, comes from presence, not pressure. When you stop chasing what you think will finally make you worthy and start embracing what your soul already knows, everything begins to align. The universe doesn't respond to your noise. It responds to your energy. And when your energy is calm, centered, and surrendered, it mirrors that peace back to you in ways you didn't even know were possible. What you force will fracture. What you allow will flow. The soul remembers what the mind forgets, that you are already whole. You don't need to fix yourself. You need to strip away everything that was never truly you. All the masks, the performances, the desperate attempts to prove your value, they only push you further from your core. When you stop trying to become something and simply allow yourself to be, life unfolds with a quiet grace. You meet people who feel like home. You attract opportunities that align with your truth. You stop living in reaction and start existing in resonance. This is not magic. This is alignment. And it's only available when you stop interfering. You may think surrender means weakness, but it's actually the highest form of strength. It's when you release the illusion of control and trust the soul's deeper knowing. You stop needing answers and start becoming the space where answers arrive naturally. You stop demanding signs and become the sign. This is what Carl Jung meant when he taught that the unconscious drives our lives when left unexamined. The more you quiet the noise, the more you allow your soul to lead. And when your soul leads, life doesn't just change, it begins to reflect who you've been all along, beneath the striving, beneath the silence, beneath the search. You already are what you seek. Now let the universe prove it. To affirm your return to your true self, declare it with intention. Comment below, I already am enough. To honor your inner wholeness and inspire others to stop chasing and start remembering who they truly are. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Carl Jung's silent truth. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not interfere, to simply trust, observe, and allow the universe to respond in its own divine timing. Let life reveal its wisdom without your constant intervention. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming videos that guide you deeper into spiritual growth and inner peace. What happens when the empath finally breaks? Carl Jung's most chilling warning: beware the fury of a patient man. This powerful quote by John Dryden sets the tone for today's journey into the depths of the empath's soul. On Spiritual Wisdom, we're diving into one of Carl Jung's most chilling insights. What happens when the often silent, underestimated empath finally breaks? Have you ever wondered why the quietest people carry the deepest storms? Or why those who feel the most are the ones society dismisses the quickest? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt like your kindness was mistaken for weakness? As we explore this profound message, I encourage you to reflect on how embracing both your light and shadow can lead to true personal growth and lasting inner peace. Now, let's begin. 1. Empaths are often misjudged. They say still waters run deep. But when it comes to empaths, those waters can become tidal waves if pushed too far. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who laid the foundation of analytical psychology, issued a warning that still echoes in today's chaotic world, one that too many ignore. Never mistake the silent kindness of an empath for weakness. In a culture where loud voices and dominant personalities often claim center stage, we overlook the ones observing in silence the men who feel deeply but rarely speak of their pain, the spiritual warriors who heal others but hide their own wounds. Jung understood that the empath lives in a paradox, a constant dance between light and shadow, where emotional openness isn't a flaw. It's a conscious choice to remain gentle in a world that rewards aggression. He believed this depth of feeling was not a deficiency, but a sign of profound spiritual strength and restraint, a sign that such a person had begun the journey of spiritual awakening. So why are empaths so often misunderstood? It's because society measures strength in the volume of a voice, not in the depth of the soul. But the empath's calm exterior conceals a furnace of emotional energy that, if ignited, could scorch the very ones who took their kindness for granted. Jung's psychology explains this as a function of the shadow of the hidden self we repress to survive social expectations. Empaths, especially men raised in environments where stoicism was demanded and softness ridiculed, carry enormous pressure within. They feel everything: your words, your intentions, the tension in a room, and yet they endure in silence. But silence is not submission. Silence, for an empath, is sacred space. And when that space is repeatedly violated, the eruption is not just personal, it's archetypal. It's the moment when the archetype of the wounded healer gives way to the warrior. We live in a world where men are still taught to armor up, to man up, to push down anything that might seem vulnerable. But empaths defy that conditioning. They are the emotional truth tellers, the spiritual mirrors of a society that doesn't know how to sit with discomfort. And yet, when these men finally break, when they've given too much, tolerated too long, and suppressed too deeply, they don't fall apart. They break open. They awaken to their own power. That awakening can look like withdrawal, silence, or transformation, but what it really is rebirth. It's the moment the empath stops healing everyone else and begins healing himself. That's the true spiritual awakening. Carl Jung spoke of a descent into one's inner abyss to confront the shadow, and the rise that follows when a man finally meets the full truth of who he is. If you are a man who has always felt overwhelmed or told to man up, this message is for you. Your emotional depth is not a weakness, it is your gift. But like all sacred gifts, it must be honored and protected. So let me ask you, what masks have you worn just to survive? What parts of your soul have you hidden because the world tells you they are too much? If you are feeling the tension, the buildup, the quiet storm brewing inside, you are not broken. You are being called to evolve. Let this be your moment of reckoning, your spiritual awakening. Because when the empath finally breaks, he does not become less. He becomes the man he was always meant to be. Comment below. I became the man I was meant to be. 2. Jung's shadow theory and the empath. What Carl Jung discovered about the human psyche sheds powerful light on why empaths, who seem so gentle and compassionate on the outside, can become some of the most formidable forces when pushed too far. According to Jung's shadow theory, Every human being carries both light and shadow within the capacity for kindness, love, and empathy, but also the potential for anger, pain, and power. Empaths feel this duality more intensely than most. They're deeply tuned into the emotions of others, often taking on the pain around them in silence. But here's the truth that many overlook. When an empath finally breaks, it's not chaos that erupts its clarity. It's not rage, but a spiritual awakening. This moment isn't about revenge or drama. It's about reclaiming their energy, their boundaries, and their voice. They stop explaining themselves. They stop bending. And in that stillness, their shadow, the part of them that has absorbed pain, betrayal, and suppression, finally stands tall. Not with fists, but with firm self-awareness. Picture someone you know, maybe even yourself, who spent years pleasing others, keeping peace at the expense of their own well-being. One day, they stop returning certain calls. They decline invites they used to accept out of guilt. They set limits and say no without apology. That isn't bitterness. That's growth. That's the shadow no longer suppressed, but integrated with their light. It's spiritual maturity in action. Let's take a story from modern life. Think of a woman who always put her family first, often ignoring her own needs. She stayed quiet during family arguments, absorbed insults at work, and constantly suppressed her emotions to avoid conflict. People called her so sweet, too nice, and easygoing. But one day, after years of inner tension, something shifted. Not with yelling or breakdowns, but with silence and decisions. She filed for divorce, left a toxic job, and started writing again, something she had loved before losing herself and everyone else's expectations. Friends were shocked. Some called her cold, but those who looked closer saw something else. She had awakened. Her shadow wasn't evil. It was power she had buried beneath politeness. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The empath who breaks does not fall apart. They return to themselves. And that is where true spiritual growth begins. So I ask you this: what parts of yourself have you silenced to keep others comfortable? Where have you confused your kindness with a lack of strength? Are you carrying burdens that do not belong to you, thinking it is your spiritual duty to suffer in silence? The awakening of an empath is not the end of their compassion. It is the beginning of their boundaries. It is the birth of a new identity, where light and dark go hand in hand, not in conflict, but in harmony. That is the essence of true spirituality. The next time you feel your limits being tested, do not fear your darkness. Explore it. It has something to teach you. And the lesson is this: you were never weak. You were simply waiting to remember your own strength. Comment below. I am strong. 3. Empaths transform through pain. Let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone so quiet, so deeply feeling, that you could almost sense they were carrying 1,000 unspoken stories? That person is often the empath. And while many misunderstand the empath as weak or overly sensitive, Carl Jung saw something else entirely, something powerful. He believed that pain isn't just pain. It's a signal, a teacher, a spiritual invitation to transformation. He called this journey individuation the process of becoming whole, of integrating your shadow and light into one true self. And for the empath, pain isn't just part of the story, it is the story. Because from an early age, empaths are thrown into emotional chaos. They're often betrayed by those they trust, manipulated by those they love, and emotionally wounded not once, but over and over again. But here's the twist. Those very wounds become the pressure that shapes the diamond. Those traumas aren't just setbacks. They're the fire through which spiritual wisdom is forged. As Jung once said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. That quote alone captures the essence of what every empath knows in their bones. Transformation is born through fire, not comfort. So if you've ever wondered why your journey has been so heavy, why you've carried burdens that others can't even name, it's not because you're cursed. It's because you're being carved into something sacred. Have you noticed how the empath, after breaking, doesn't become bitter, but becomes sharper, more discerning, more spiritually attuned? It's because the breaking point isn't an ending. It's a spiritual awakening. The pain you've endured forces you to question everything, including your own identity. And slowly, layer by layer, you begin to peel off the masks you once wore to survive. You start to separate who you truly are from who you had to be to feel loved. And in that sacred space, the real you begins to emerge raw, radiant, and untouchable. That's what Carl Jung meant when he spoke about individuation. It's the journey of the soul remembering itself. And it's not some distant theory. It's something you live every single time your heart is broken and you still choose to feel, to love, to rise. Let me pause and ask you, have you looked back at your pain as a path, not just a wound? What has it taught you? What did it force you to discover about yourself that ease never could? These questions matter because they unlock a deeper truth. You were never meant to remain broken. You were meant to transform. And while society still whispers that feeling deeply is a weakness, spiritual wisdom tells us otherwise. It tells us that those who feel deeply also heal deeply, and that those who break deeply are often the ones who rebuild with the most unshakable foundations. So the next time you feel yourself cracking under the weight of emotion, remember that it's not the end. It's the threshold. As Carl Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So maybe, just maybe, your breaking point is not your downfall, but your initiation. And in that breaking, you begin not to shatter, but to remember who you truly are and why you were chosen to feel this much in the first place. If this resonates with you, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Your journey to stoic self-mastery and victory continues with each lesson. 4. The emergence of power. What narcissists often fail to grasp is that the very emotional sensitivity they exploit in empaths is not a weakness. It is a form of advanced emotional intelligence, one that silently observes, calculates, and evolves beneath the surface. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This rings especially true for the empath who, after years of internalizing pain, awakens not with rage, but with clarity. The moment of spiritual awakening marks a profound turning point where the empath no longer reacts impulsively to chaos, but instead responds with surgical precision. Like a man who's trained in silence, the awakened empath begins to recognize toxic patterns with near clairvoyant accuracy. He sees through manipulation, discerns projection, and no longer doubts his gut feeling because his soul has become his compass. In today's world, Where emotional suppression is often mistaken for strength, the spiritually awakened man redefines masculinity through presence, wisdom, and discernment. It is not about shouting to be heard, but about being so deeply attuned to your truth that silence speaks louder than noise. The man who has walked through emotional fire and come out purified is not easily fooled again. This transformation is what makes the empath dangerous, not in a destructive way, but in a deeply sovereign one. He no longer seeks to be understood by everyone, only to remain aligned with his own values. In a culture that rewards cold detachment, the awakened empath becomes a spiritual warrior, choosing conscious connection over control. And that is the emergence of true power, the kind that doesn't need validation, but radiates conviction. So let me ask you, have you been mistaking your sensitivity for weakness when it might actually be your superpower waiting to be activated? When you stop reacting and start discerning, when you step out of your emotional fog and into spiritual clarity, who might you finally become? Drop a comment below if you felt that shift within yourself, or if you're still navigating the shadows on your path to awakening, because this journey is not just personal, it's spiritual. And in the end, the one who was once underestimated becomes the one they should have never provoked. 5. The transcendent function. Let me speak to you directly, because what we're about to explore may just change the way you understand yourself and your journey through pain, boundaries, and awakening. Carl Jung, one of the most insightful minds in psychology, called it the transcendent function, the spiritual capacity to hold the tension of opposites within you without collapsing under the weight of it. Now think about that for a moment. Have you ever felt like you were being pulled in two completely different directions on one side, the desire to stay open, kind, and loving? On the other, the need to protect yourself from a world that keeps pushing your limits. That right there is the battlefield where spiritual growth is forged. And for empaths, those deeply feeling souls, this inner tension becomes their daily reality. Yet the ones who awaken, the ones who don't break, but rise, are those who develop this transcendent function. They learn to feel every emotion without being ruled by it. They sense the lies, the manipulation, the pain around them. But instead of collapsing or becoming bitter, they respond with clarity and conviction. That is not a weakness. That is strength, refined by fire. Let me tell you a story to bring this home. There's a woman I once met. We'll call her Maria. She was the kind of person who would stay late to help coworkers, answer phone calls from friends at 3 a.m, and always smiled, even when she was drowning inside. But years of people-pleasing, of always putting others first, chipped away at her until one day, her body broke down stress-induced illness, total burnout, and emotional numbness. She thought she was broken. But in that dark night of the soul, she began to awaken. She started setting boundaries, speaking up, and prioritizing her spiritual well-being. And something incredible happened. Her presence changed. She no longer bent to fit the world. The world started bending around her. This is what Jung meant. The transcendent function is not about escape. It's about transformation. You take the parts of you that feel too soft and too much, and you let them become your power, not by hiding them, but by anchoring them in truth and discernment. So let me ask you, what tension are you holding inside of yourself right now? What are you afraid of in your life that if you stop pleasing others or taking on their pain, you will no longer be loved? And what if the opposite is true? What if your spiritual growth depends on your willingness to feel deeply, but choose wisely? What if your soul is not broken, but is being broken? Jung warned us that there is no realization without pain, but he also showed us that this pain, when held with courage, leads to wholeness. So if you are an empath on the brink, feeling the storm brewing inside you, don't be afraid of it. Use it. Let it guide you to clarity. Let it teach you what to say no to, what to avoid, and what to give your love to. Because awakened empaths are not only kind, they are strong. They are clear-headed, and they are calm in a chaotic world, not because they feel inadequate, but because they have learned to rise above the emotional noise without disconnecting from their soul. Ultimately, the lesson is this: your sensitivity is not a curse, it is your compass. But it only works when you stop abandoning yourself and start honoring your own truth. That is the beginning of your spiritual rebirth. And that is what makes your journey not only painful, but also incredibly sacred. Comment below: I am starting with spiritual rebirth. 6. Boundaries are power. Let me speak directly to your soul, because if you've ever been the kind of person who feels everything deeply, who walks into a room and absorbs the energy like a sponge, then you know that being an empath isn't a soft story. It's a spiritual initiation. And Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, warned us of something few ever talk about: the moment when the empath stops being the healer and becomes the mirror. You see, spiritual wisdom teaches that there is a breaking point, not a collapse, but an awakening. And when that moment comes, the empath, who once gave without limits, suddenly begins to understand that boundaries are not just defense, they are power. Before this realization, the empath moves through life trying to soothe, fix, or absorb the wounds of others, often confusing love with rescue. But here's the shift. They stop performing empathy for those who exploit it. They begin to see that their constant self-sacrifice isn't healing anyone, it's enabling dysfunction. And instead of soaking in the chaos, they reflect it back, not with rage or revenge, but with calm, unshakable truth. This transformation isn't loud. It doesn't make noise. The real power of the empath is in their silence, their ability to leave without explanation, to protect their peace without apology, and to love from a distance without guilt. Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's what happens when the empath wakes up. They stop blaming fate and start owning their energy. They realize that their gift of empathy wasn't meant to be drained by people who refuse to grow. It was meant to be shared with those who reciprocate. This is where boundaries come in, not as walls to keep others out, but as gates to protect what's sacred. And what could be more sacred than your mental clarity, your emotional peace, and your spiritual growth? The broken empath doesn't become cold. They become clear. They no longer internalize the dysfunction of others. Instead, they mirror it, gently but firmly, showing people the truth of their behavior without aggression. Have you ever wondered why certain people get uncomfortable when you finally say no? Or when you stop explaining yourself? That's the sign you've stepped into your power. The empath who sets boundaries is no longer playing the role of the wounded caretaker. They are now a conscious, centered being who knows that protecting their energy is not selfish, it's wise. So I ask you this: where in your life have you confused compassion with submission? Who have you allowed to drain your light in the name of love? And more importantly, when will you begin to choose yourself, not as a last resort, but as a sacred priority? Because when the empath finally breaks, what is truly shattered is the illusion that they were ever weak. What emerges is a person who is spiritually awakened, emotionally grounded, and empowered by the very wisdom that was once considered a curse. That is the essence of spiritual wisdom, and Carl Jung saw it long before the rest of the world did. Comment below: I am spiritually awakened and emotionally grounded. 7. Psychological sovereignty. In the stage of psychological sovereignty, something profound happens in the life of an empath who has undergone a true spiritual awakening. No longer driven by the compulsive need to validate their worth through saving others, the individuated empath chooses peace over performance. They stop being emotionally available to the chaos of everyone else's dysfunction and begin reclaiming their own energy like a sacred currency, spending it with intention, not impulse. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that's exactly what this stage represents: a deep alignment with the authentic self. The empath, having wrestled with the shadow, now operates from a place of spiritual strength rather than emotional survival. They are no longer defined by other people's needs or pain. Instead, they are driven by their own inner compass, one calibrated through hard-earned discernment. In a society that thrives on codependency and validation loops, this kind of spiritual autonomy looks almost rebellious. But in truth, it's not rebellion, it's liberation. Manipulators, energy vampires, and narcissists find themselves powerless in the presence of such clarity. Why? Because the empath no longer bleeds for those who would never even hand them a bandage. Their boundaries are no longer built out of fear, but forged from wisdom. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. They've learned that compassion without boundaries is self-betrayal. And in this new phase, their kindness is no longer available to be weaponized. This psychological sovereignty becomes a spiritual shield, and not because the empath is armored in ego, but because they are finally grounded in truth. It's a sacred transformation that men, especially those aged between 30 and 65, can resonate with deeply, because it speaks to a time when the urge to fix everything outside finally collapses into the realization that the only thing that ever needed rescuing was the self. So let me ask you, have you reached the point where your peace means more than being understood? Where your solitude no longer feels like punishment, but like power? If so, you are not broken. You are awakening. You are learning to belong to yourself in a world that has trained you to belong to everyone else. This is where spiritual wisdom meets psychological clarity. This is where you stop chasing the breath of approval and begin breathing the air of freedom. And this is the moment, as Jung said, when your shadow becomes your power, not something to hide from, but something to integrate, own, and walk with. The man who reaches this level of spiritual mastery does not speak louder. He simply stops needing to explain, and in that silence, his presence becomes undeniable. Comment below: I am a spiritual master. 8. From wounds to wisdom. What if your deepest wounds weren't signs of weakness, but the birthplace of your greatest wisdom. Carl Jung believed that the path to wholeness always begins with descent, what he called the hero's journey, a process where you must face the darkest parts of yourself to truly awaken. And for the empath, this descent is not just metaphorical. It's deeply emotional and spiritual. You, as someone who feels the pain of others so intensely, may often wonder why your sensitivity seems to attract suffering. But here's the truth. You are not cursed. You are being carved. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That means real spiritual growth doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from transforming it. In our modern world, where silence is mistaken for weakness and kindness for naivety, many empaths spend years trying to be understood only to be used, dismissed, or betrayed. But there comes a moment, usually after being pushed too far, when the empath breaks, not in rage, not in revenge, but in realization. It's the moment they stop begging to be seen and begin seeing themselves. Let me tell you a story. There's a woman I know, let's call her Maya, who spent over 10 years trying to fix everyone around her. She gave love freely, forgave endlessly, and made excuses for those who hurt her. But one day, after being betrayed by someone she trusted deeply, she didn't lash out. She didn't spiral into despair. Instead, she did something extraordinary. She got quiet. She began journaling, meditating, and walking in nature. Slowly, she turned her gaze inward, not to escape others, but to understand herself. And what she found was stunning. Beneath all the pain was a strength she never knew she had. Her compassion deepened, not because she continued to give it away recklessly, but because she finally learned to offer it to herself. That was her spiritual awakening, not a lightning bolt moment, but a quiet, consistent unfolding. Doesn't that make you wonder? What if your own suffering has been preparing you for something more profound? This is the essence of Jung's most powerful insight into spirituality. Transformation doesn't come from avoiding the shadow. It comes from integrating it. For the empath, the shadow is the part of them that says, "I matter too." And when that voice finally gets heard, the empath rises not just as a healer of others, but as a whole person. So if you've ever felt broken, betrayed, or burned out by the weight of feeling too much, let this be your turning point. Not towards bitterness, but towards balance. Not to shut people out, but to bring yourself back in. Your wounds were never meant to end you. They were meant to wake you up. So I ask you now, what wisdom is waiting in your wounds? And are you willing to listen to it? The path of spiritual growth is not about escaping your emotions. It's about learning to walk with them, speak their language, and then rise from them as something more integrated, more conscious, more whole. Let this be the moment you stop seeing your sensitivity as a flaw and start honoring it as a gift. Because the empath's power was never in how much they could endure for others, but in how bravely they could return to themselves. What part of this message resonates with you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how this has shaped your journey. As we explored in today's video, Carl Jung's most chilling warning reminds us that the quietest soul in the room, the empath, is not weak, but deeply powerful when pushed beyond their limits. When the empath breaks, they don't shatter, they awaken. They rise with a strength forged in silence, betrayal, and emotional depth. If this resonates with you, Take a moment to reflect. Have you ever mistaken your empathy for weakness? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if you found value in this message, don't forget to like, subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and pass it on to someone who needs to understand the true power of sensitivity. Your light matters,